Welcome to the All Out Leadership Podcast, hosted by Pastor Eric Lawson, where each episode is uniquely designed to help you live all out by bringing you practical leadership from a biblical perspective delivered in 10 minutes or less. So whether you're a business leader, serving in ministry, or simply looking to grow in your leadership, this podcast is for you. Before we dive into this week's topic, make sure to subscribe to the podcast and download the show notes at ericlawson.com/podcast. And while you're at it, feel free to share the content on social media. Now, let's join Pastor Eric for this week's conversation.
Welcome to another edition of the All Out Leadership Podcast. We are continuing in the book of Revelation, chapter 1, 2, and 3. We are looking at the overarching concept of longevity, and a critical component of that is feedback. If you missed any of this, I highly encourage you to go back, because we're just building line by line, verse upon verse, precept upon precept on this subject, and we're learning from the greatest leader in the universe, and that is Jesus himself. We've looked at how Jesus gives feedback to the church of Ephesus, and the first thing he did is he looked for what was right: positive praise, performance. So he's just praising what's right. We looked at that last week and how you can go about doing that. Today I want to talk about what Jesus did next, and that is, of the seven churches, Jesus found 5 that needed some type of correction, some type of tweaking. And it doesn't always have to be big correction. When pilots are flying planes, they do a thing called crabbing. Because there's always crosswinds that over time will slowly push a plane off course. So they'll constantly course themselves. They'll kind of just course correct in small increments, and it's just called crabbing, because ultimately if they don't crab along the way, they're going to be way off course from their target. And so when you see, whether it's big, whether it's small, you need to provide course correction feedback. So we read in chapter 2, verse 4, Jesus says, to this church, there was a lot of things they did well, but he says this: nevertheless, I have this against you, that you've fallen from your first love. Remember, therefore, from where you have fallen. Jesus makes very clear his expectations, and that's a challenge a lot of organizations have, is there's just not clearly defined expectations. Look, if people don't know what the bullseye is in your culture, if they don't know what the win is in terms of results, aim at nothing, you're going to hit it every time. And a lot of people are getting in trouble for things they didn't even know they were supposed to be doing. And that's why this feedback is so important. And so he goes, look, even though you're working hard, you've lost your first love, you've lost your passion. Let's get back to that. There were certain things you used to do, guys. Let's go back and do those. And so he gives that feedback. I love what Winston Churchill says. He says, criticism may not be agreeable, but it's necessary. It fills the same function as pain in the human body. It calls attention to an unhealthy state of things. One reason many leaders avoid giving the corrective part of feedback, a lot are really good at the attaboys, way to go, good job, but a lot fall short when it comes to the correction, the crabbing coaching sessions along the way. And that's because it just feels painful. It just feels like, well, if I'm a Christian, if I really loved them, I wouldn't hurt their feelings. Look, hurting feelings and love that has nothing to do with Christianity. Jesus hurt people's feelings all the time. I'm sure he hurt the Pharisees' feelings when he said, your whitewashed tomb's full of dead man's bones. He probably hurt Peter's feelings when he said, get thee behind me, Satan. Like, Jesus hurt feelings. Why? Because the bigger issue is our character, not our feelings. Our success, not our short-term comfort. And so Winston Churchill's right on the money, and that is, when you provide constructive feedback, even though it's painful, pain lets you know that there's something that's not healthy and something that needs to be fixed. So as a leader, if you have to push through this, make this part of your IDP, your individual development plan, and that is to grow at constructive feedback. The goal of being a leader isn't to be liked by everybody, to be loved by everybody. It's to be a great leader. And a great leader sometimes hurts feelings, makes difficult decisions, but at the end of the day, you have everybody's best in mind and the best of the organization in mind, and that is, you want ultimately to see your team, your people, win, and you're going to have some painful conversations in that process. Now, what Jesus does next is he doesn't just say, hey, this stinks, and walks away. He gives them an action plan. This is where like an IDP would come in, an individual development plan. Jesus gives them their IDP. He goes, remember, therefore, from where you've fallen, repent, do the first works, or else I'll come to you and remove your lampstand. So he really says three things. He goes, look, let's remember, in other words, let's analyze. This is why KPIs are so important, your key performance indicators. Hopefully you're tracking your organization's metrics. This would be your cash. This would be, your customers, different inventories. Every company's going to be a little bit different. But you should have your dashboard of key performance indicators. And what this allows you to do is see past performance. Past performance is no predictor of future performance, but it allows you to go, are we winning? Are we lagging? Are we stagnant? And Jesus goes, look, you got some indicators that are looking great, but then we got some areas you're falling. The metrics are going down. And I know why they've gone down. They've gone down because you've lost your first love. So then he gives them an action step. He goes, repent. Your attitude needs to do an about face. Quit repeating the same mistakes. And then he goes, look, so repent, just change your attitude. Let's change your expectations. Let's change our strategy. And then he goes this, let's return. He goes, remember, repent and return. Let's return to certain actions. Let's return to those certain things. And Jesus has shared in different ways and different concepts. He goes, there's certain things that you want to keep. There's certain things that you want to stay, right? So there's certain things that should stay, there's certain things that should stop, and there's certain things that you should start. So inside of your action plan, you should look at what stays, what starts, and what stops. We can really see this inside of Jesus. He goes, look, there's certain things you're doing great. Let's keep that. That stays. There's certain things you need to stop, and there's certain things you need to start. Let's start getting back to what made us great as an organization. And what you'll almost always find inside of an organization, inside of a team, inside of a football team, it's often the little things that got you where you were that we stopped doing, and then we lose where we were because it was the little things we stopped doing. And I find this all the time inside of the church. We started certain great best practices. 2 years later, I think those things are running, and I found out after a staff transition or two, those things drifted by the way, and I'm going, what? Those are great practices. We need to go back to that, and we have a lot of conversations as a team about that. All right, we're going to look at the third leg of what Jesus does inside of providing great feedback. We're going to look at that next week.
Thank you for joining us on the All Out Leadership Podcast. We hope you gained new biblical insight that challenged you to grow in your leadership. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, we would love your help in getting the content out farther. You can help by subscribing to the podcast at ericlawson.com/podcast and telling others about it. Next week, Pastor Eric will be back with another episode. So until then, we hope you have a great week being an all-out leader.